Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in our presentation of Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, or just al-Ghazali, significant person in the Islam religion. Today, I'll be speaking to the selected slides of the PowerPoint that you see on your screen. I won't be reading from it, as you will have access to this information and will be able to read it in your own time. I'm sure that these notes are familiar to you, or you have similar notes and resources given to you by your teachers. So let's begin. Keeping with the syllabus dot points, I will give a brief overview of al-Ghazali's life, contributions, and impact in the development and expression of Islam. Al-Ghazali was born in Tus, modern-day Iran, in 1058 CE, and he died in 1111 CE. In his life, al-Ghazali was a teacher, a jurist, philosopher, doctor, a mystical thinker, to name a few of his interests, and that reflect his educational background. He taught Islamic philosophy at the famed Nizamiya College and was renowned as a head of the intellectual Islamic community. Such was his standing and reputation, al-Ghazali is referred to by many titles, such as the Proof of Islam, Renewer of Religion, Ornament of the Faith. He was a mystic, master jurist, and of course, a philosopher. Many modern scholars regard al-Ghazali as the most important teacher in the history of Islam. Now, remember that society at the time was an affluent Muslim community in a pluralistic civilization. Muslims were ahead of everybody else in science, medicine, mathematics, architecture, and of course, philosophy. The measurement or the yardstick of the intelligentsia of the society at the time was delving into Greek philosophy. Hence, al-Ghazali's main challenge was the existing tension between philosophy and religion. Philosophy representing human free will, reason, logic, science, and religion relating to religious law, dogma, and in Islam's case, Sharia law. As a Sufi, al-Ghazali also felt that philosophy contradicted his Sufi beliefs and also that of the mainstream Islam. He challenged the two schools of thought at the time, the Asharite theology, the Sunni variant, and the Ismailite theology, the Shia variant. One such challenge was refuting the Shia's views on the infallibility of the Imam. This helped strengthen Sunnism as a main variant of Islam. Such was the influence of al-Ghazali. You'll find more of these debates in your notes at a later date. Now, all the while, al-Ghazali was busy lecturing Islamic jurisprudence, refuting heresies, responding to questions from all areas of the community. However, around 1095 CE, al-Ghazali had a spiritual awakening, or some call it a midlife crisis, where he left his academic positions and went on a quest to seek spiritual fulfillment, and possibly went on pilgrimage to Mecca. During his time away, al-Ghazali had developed many important concepts and thoughts about theology and philosophy. In his spiritual journey, he came to the realization that certainty of knowledge would only result after achieving a deeper and more intimate connection with God by removing ego of oneself. Al-Ghazali found this connection through the mystic sect of Sufism, a sect that was quite small and often criticized by the mainstream variants of Sunni and Shiites. Sufism was not considered to be a legitimate expression of Islam. He concluded that understanding God and having a true and personal connection by bridging the gap between the spiritual world and the physical world was the idea of God's supremacy, something that was undermined by philosophy. Yet, it was his education of philosophy, ironically, that equipped him with two areas of argument against philosophy: use of reason and logic, which again he used to undermine the Hellenistic philosophy to strengthen his own theological reasoning. Extending from this idea of Sufism, al-Ghazali refuted many concepts of Aristotelian philosophy, Ideas such as the Aristotelian philosophy that the universe was always present and therefore will always continue to be present, Al-Ghazali refuted this by stating that the universe was created by God, and if God could create the universe, therefore God had the power to end it. Al-Ghazali openly critiqued the works of the influential philosophers in his book, The Incoherence of Philosophers. This was an important contribution attributed to Al-Ghazali. Some of the disputed points included another Aristotelian view that resurrection could not occur. Al-Ghazali's belief was that if Allah could create life, then Allah can recreate life. These disputed points can be encapsulated in Al-Ghazali's quote. Among the objects lying within God's power, there are strange and wondrous things, not all of which have been seen. Why then should we deny the possibility and judge them to be impossible? It was this defending of the Islamic theology, known as Kalam, that Al-Ghazali influenced the harmonizing of Sunni and Shiites and strengthened theology against a philosophical stance in society. Stemming from his defense of theology and promoting his adherence of Sufism, Al-Ghazali felt a strong connection to Allah, and this was achieved by combining knowledge, personal, spiritual, and mystical disciplines. This way of Sufi thinking led to another important contribution of Al-Ghazali, when he wrote The Revival of Religious Sciences. Basically, this reshaped and refined Sufi teachings to bring it more in line with mainstream Islam. He did this by combining Sharia law and mysticism. And by doing this, he gained acceptance from mainstream Islam and thus beginning to legitimize Sufi as an accepted variant of Islam. Revival of the Religious Sciences is one of the most widely read books in Islam. In this book, Al-Ghazali emphasizes that education should not be limited to information, but encompass all aspects of life, moral, physical, intellectual, and religious. It is through all these aspects that one could achieve full happiness and get closer to Allah. Al-Ghazali was also a prolific writer. There are over 70 texts attributed to him. Although some of these works were disputed, as mentioned before, all of the religious and the incoherence of the philosophers. Other works include The Alchemy of Happiness, which again embraces Sufism, and Logic of Philosophy. Again, let me re-emphasize that the content available for Al-Ghazali is vast and diverse. And although I've touched briefly on some of his contributions, it is up to you to select the content necessary to cover the syllabus dot points. And if you go back to this PowerPoint, there are many slides that can help you with that. Or similarly, notes from your teachers and your own notes would be a great help to start. And so let's summarize basically Al-Ghazali's influences and his interventions in the following areas. So, number one, he defended Sunni Islam against flawed theology. He took on the Ismailites and the Mu'tazilites school of theology at the time. He intervened in the struggles between revelation and reason. He refuted Greek theology that was in contradiction with Islam. He sought to resolve philosophy and reconcile philosophy and religion, reconciled the Islamic Sharia law and Islamic spirituality, giving Sufism credence and acceptance into mainstream Islam. And of course, as mentioned before, he was a prolific writer of texts in the areas of theology, philosophy, and education. Finally, his impacts. Al-Ghazali's work has had a profound impact on Islam. Effectively, he harmonized the Islam of the Quran, the Islamic theologians, the legalists, and the Sufis against the philosophers. In doing so, he produced a well-structured and comprehensive summation of Islamic religious thought. He gave Sufism a sound theoretical foundation and caused the movement he recognized in Sufism is still very influential in Islam. Although it enjoys nothing of its former glory, Islam theology grew increasingly hostile to what was considered continuing innovations of Sufism and philosophy. As a result, Orthodox Islam became increasingly focused on Islamic law and gradually returned to fundamentalism. For centuries, Islamic society found itself in a period of intellectual sterility, during which unquestioning orthodoxy held the Islamic community together in a rigid system. Today, his works still form major parts of curriculums in Islamic studies around the world. Known as the Proof of Islam, recognizing the extent and quality of his teaching, Al-Ghazali was definitely a person of significance. Next, we move on to the second part of today's masterclass. So how do we put some of this content into practical use? We have created a table with 5 headings that is a useful template to summarize key points of Al-Ghazali or of any significant person in any religion. This table consists of 5 columns where it's, as a useful study tool, we identify the contribution, describe the contribution, explain the importance of the contribution, giving a little bit of background context, analyze the impact of the contribution, and a little bit further along the Bloom's taxonomy to evaluate the significance of the impact and providing contemporary examples. Now, I've given here just a generic modeling of what this could look like. My mum gave me a bike for Christmas. Identify the contribution. Describe the contribution. Well, it had a red bell, basket, single speed, brown leather. Was given to, so I've included a date there because to give your responses a little bit of veracity, you need to include some dates, etc., to make sure that it is a legitimate contribution. Explain the importance of the contribution. Well, it was important because at the time I had gained 20 kilos during the lockdown. And when I needed to lose some weight, the bike motivated me to exercise because the bike was sturdy and riding it was enjoyable. Chubby, 2021. There I've included a quote. So this might be a good spot here, a good place to include some of your quotes. The fourth column, analyze the impact of the contribution. I took up regular bike riding, lost 30 kilos, encouraged me to take up further forms of exercise, including swimming and yoga. So that was the impact of that contribution. And a little bit further along, evaluate the significance. Well, the ongoing impact to this day is that I possibly avoided heart disease and diabetes. My blood pressure dropped and maintained to a good level over the next 10 years. Now, let's apply those situations, those columns, to, as I mentioned, can be to any significant person, and in this case, Al-Ghazali. So I've chosen the contribution of Al-Ghazali's contribution towards Sufism. So I've placed in the first column, Sufism, identified the contribution, described the contribution as Sufi was not regarded as a legitimate variant of Islam. It was criticized for disregarding the obligations in Sharia law. Al-Ghazali, as an embracer of Sufism, helped legitimize Sufism as an accepted expression of Islam. That meant it was necessary, explain the importance of the contribution. Well, Al-Ghazali believed that there was a limit to the knowledge gained through rational means of higher learning, and closeness to Allah could only be achieved through mystical disciplines. He quotes, two things, truthfulness with God Almighty and good conduct with people. Anyone who practices these 2 things is a Sufi. So that's where I've placed my quote in that column. To analyze the impact, well, from the revival of the religious sciences, it became a most influential text. It legitimized Sufism, made it acceptable in mainstream Islam. It demonstrated how observances of duties imposed by Sharia law was important to the authentic Sufi life. And an extension of that, and using contemporary example, it continues to influence Muslim and non-Muslim thinking from his time till today. Thinkers such as Thomas Aquinas. The patronage of Al-Ghazali led to Sufism gaining a great acceptance and respect with Islam, and to this day has been able to continue and grow as a significant element in the Islamic world. Now that's just one contribution. You could add 2, 3, or 4 more contributions, and using this format, we're hoping that it will help you answer a variety form of questions, whether it be short answers or extended responses. So in the following slides, I've included some sample HSC questions and their responses. Note that the responses in white text relate to the first 2 columns of our table in the previous slide, and the higher order questions like the analyze and the evaluate questions are also included, would be in yellow text. An example of this, sorry, before we move on, I've got a couple of writing hints that I sort of tell our students when it comes to using examples, or in this case, contributions to discuss when answering a question. The rule of thumb, let it be the rule of 3. If you want more, then go for 4. That means I encourage our students to have at least 3 examples, 3 contributions, 3 paragraphs with the introduction and conclusion in an essay to get a decent mark, or at least go for 4 if you want more marks. Be prepared to have 3 or 4 examples, 4 contributions. And the way that looks like will be displayed in the next slide. So here we've got a question from the HSC. Summarize a contribution of one significant person of school of thought other than Muhammad, etc. Of course, and we are doing our Ghazali. And the response is, it's only a 3 marker, remember, so maybe 3 will be enough. 3 examples would be, contributions will be enough, and they're highlighted in light blue. Al-Ghazali lived during the 11th century in Iran, just a little bit of background information, who he was, an Islamic teacher, and his contributions are that he questioned anthropomorphic images of God, he wrote the revival of religious sciences, and he also wrote the alchemy of happiness. There are 3 contributions already, and he also rejected the idea of conforming to various philosophies. So there's 4 contributions mentioned in that short answer, and that would definitely score you very high marks. In the next short answer response, this was summarizing the impact. Again, using that formula I've just mentioned before in that table, we've got here at least 3 impacts mentioned. His revival of Islamic knowledge remains today as one of the most read teachings of Islam. His teachings on the very nature of Allah are continually expressed through adherents worldwide to this day. He promoted peace amongst the sects of Islam by criticizing universal teaching, thus providing middle ground on which all Islamic adherents could relate and coexist. So notice that the impact have far-reaching effects of today, thus fulfilling all those syllabus dot points of development and expression of Islam to today. Here's another one. Now this is an 8 marker, and again, it's all in white. So basically this response has used mostly the first 2 columns of our table, and that is identifying and describing the contribution. And our next slide after that, again, another outline contribution of one significant person. Again, you can find evidence if you've used that table, identify and describe the contribution. That's more than enough to answer a 3-mark question. When we get to the next response, a little bit more in depth. Now, this is a 6-mark question from a past HSC question. I've highlighted the white the text in white and yellow. And this again links with the table below all the 5 columns. So the first, the white text represents identify the contribution and describe the contribution. And the yellow text is that little bit more of the analytical part and the evaluation part. And there it is there again, just in case. So if you had this table, it'll definitely help you with your study of any significant person. And whatever question, if you're answering a 3-mark question, you might draw from the first 2 columns, first 3 columns. If it's a little bit more higher order descriptor, then you definitely use the last 2 columns as well. Just a little tool to help you with your study. Now, just a couple of writing hints before we finish up. Do not brain dump or content spew. That is, do not write every piece of information that you come across in the topic. Read the question carefully. Be selective with your content by highlighting the key words and descriptors in the stimulus question. Be strategic. Plan your essay. New point or a new topic is a new paragraph. Apart from your introduction and conclusion, one would expect a minimum of 3 paragraphs in an essay. That's 5 paragraphs in total. Remember the rule, let it be the rule of 3. This should be sufficient to respond to any question in the HSC. Also, topic sentences at the beginning of every paragraph would help with organising your extended response. Another hint that I would like to pass on to you is using connectives or language that show judgment. In most higher order responses, we often get connectives such as because and therefore used ad nauseum. Use connectives that infer judgment, cause and effect, and evaluative language, such as a result of, moreover, as a consequence, furthermore, on the other hand, consequently, in addition to, etc., etc. These connectives show the marker that you are evaluating, analysing, and showing cause and effect or judgment with your responses. At this point, I'd like to thank you for listening to our masterclass, and please feel free to look at the PowerPoint in its entirety to seek other information and content. Thank you.